Welcome to the public AI for You Cafe on May 27. Today, our special guest is Steen Rasmussen from University of Southern Denmark and Santa Fe Institute with his talk on the growing mismatch between our social structures and our new technologies. My name is Carmen McWilliams, and I'm the moderator and organizer of this cafe. I'm director of the company Grasspath and partner in the European AI for You project. As always, please take notice that the session will be recorded. The recording you will find on the AI for You YouTube and GoTo channel.
To show.
The speaker gives the permission to publish it. Hi, Steen. I hear you. Are you there?
So I can see her and whatnot.
All speakers express their personal views and opinions. This is not the official AI for You project opinion. So I will introduce to you who are new, what is the AI for You Cafe about? The Web Cafe offers a series of live web sessions that will take place regularly. The cafe is an online forum to gain insights into the European AI scene. Participants get the chance to share knowledge and experiences and meet stakeholders from the various areas of AI research and application. Please feel free to promote the cafe to your friends. It's public. And again, welcome everybody here today. I'm great. There's a great audience here. Thank you that you're all joining. Please notice that the session will be again interactive, which means Steen will soon present himself and his talk. Then you can also write your questions, and I will read the questions to Steen after his presentation. And if you feel like, you can also raise your hand. There's a button with a hand. You can raise your hand, and you can also use then the microphone to ask your question personally. So now I hope Steen is there. Hi, Steen. He's not yet here. Here he is. Hi, Steen. I see you coming. Yay!
Hello.
Oh, thanks God you're here.
Yeah, of course.
The show without you.
This seminar, this seminar was sneaking up on us.
How is Denmark?
No, Denmark is good. We opened. We've pretty much opened up again here after the coronavirus. There's still a bunch of rules in play, but most of the country has sort of gotten back to normal. Actually, today is the first day we're allowed to go into the university. The students are not allowed to come yet, but there's very low, what's it called? The contagion is very low in Denmark right now. So we had our government was very fast out and shutting the country down, and I think that was a good thing.
Yeah, great. So good news from Denmark. Germany is also getting quite good, but we are not allowing any students yet before September. Pupils, yes, but students, no. So, and I will just introduce you shortly to the audience once more, because I'm delighted to present you. Steen is professor in physics and center director at the University of Southern Denmark, and also external research professor in Santa Fe Institute, New Mexico, USA. He is co-founder and CTO Transparent Internet in Spain and Denmark, and co-founder and CEO Bing Technologies. So Dr. Rasmussen has worked for more than 30 years developing the science and technology underpinning living and intelligent processes at universities and laboratories across Europe and the USA, and most recently also in companies. He has received many awards for his work, starting in 1988 with the P. Gorm Peterson Mendelgaard in presence of Her Majesty the Queen Margaret II of Denmark, and most recently in 2018 with the Lifetime Achievement Award from the International Society for Artificial Life. Since 2003, he has led international research initiatives across US, EU, and Denmark, and he has won more than 39 million in competitive basic research grants to his home institutions and international research consortia. So this is super impressive. And you there with us. I'm breathless, so now it's you. I will make you the moderator. From now on, you talk. So Steen is becoming moderator. Okay. Welcome.
Okay, so thank you for inviting me to do this here. So I thought I would talk a little bit about something that that I'm not sort of an expert on, but something that has been concerning me for the last 10 years and increasingly more so. So I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of the big picture of how our social structures and our technologies, in particular these new living and intelligence technologies, they interact with each other. And I know that most of us are, at least in this group, is interested in big data and AI and so forth, and the internet of everything. So let me just get started and see if I can figure out how to share my screen. Am I sharing my screen now?
You did share your screen. Yeah. Don't share it. Let's wait.
Oh, so I did share it. Is it?
Yeah. Now it's there. Now it's there, but we need perfect.
Ah, okay. All right. Okay. So and I'll try to give sort of a historical perspective, and then I will sort of dive into some details later on. But I think it might be useful, at least it has been for me, to look at these things in perspective. And first of all, why am I interested? Hello?
I switch off the my video due to bandwidth. You go.
Okay. So why am I interested in these things? Why am I concerned about what's going on? And I think that many of us have this sense that we are living in a time where many things are changing. And I've just sort of made a random selection of issues that I think we all can agree on. That let me see if I can. What happened now? So I can't see. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe I can close. I can close this one here. So okay. So am I still visible? Can I still see? Because I can't have this thing in front, because then I can't see my slides.
Perfect. You're
okay.
Perfect.
Thank you. So it's clear that an increasing part of our lives are unfolding in cyberspace. I ask my students when I teach in, I'm a physics professor, but I also teach in philosophy of science. And the last 5 years, I've asked them how much of their lives are actually happening in cyberspace. And every year we've sort of seen a growing tendency. If you imagine that reality is a line from A to B, and in the beginning they would say, well, about maybe 1/5. And today, many of the students, they argue with each other whether it's 1/3 or 1/2 of their lives that are actually unfolding in cyberspace. So that's a big difference. We have experienced growing inequalities within nations, while we have had diminishing inequalities between nations. So there's both some good stuff and some bad stuff in that. We have seen that our democracy has been challenged as sort of the best form of governance. I don't want to go through all the details there, but that's certainly true. We've experienced the growth of the neoliberal ideology, where the market idea has sort of penetrated more and more things. And of course, this is the philosophy is nice, except that it has a lot of unintended consequences with the result, certainly for us that are in universities, is it means more top-down controls and decreased trust in the individuals, etc. I mean, things that certainly have changed significantly since I started as a researcher. There is an increasing loss of freedom due to mass surveillance and personal profiling. We've seen distortion of democratic elections. We've seen distortion of fair markets. There's propagation of fake news, and of course, the way things are set up today is sort of ideal for dictatorships if we allow this to continue. If you look a little outside of our economic realm, then biologists are agreeing that we are in the 6th mass extinction of species, the so-called Holocene extinction, where the rate of extinction is 100 to 1,000 times the rate that we've seen for many thousand years. And we all know that there are issues with climate change. I mean, we could make many lists like that, but these are just some of the fundamental issues that make me think about what the heck is going on. So let's try to have a historical look. One of the many wonderful things has happened here in the last few years. One of them is that many economists and historians, they have worked together to generate a time series of wealth for many countries. And what you see here is the human wealth evolution for about 1,000 years. I mean, I've talked to some of these people, and of course, there's a lot of uncertainty as to what the income is or the wealth is of a person that lived 1,000 years ago, when Denmark was a great nation with Vikings, etc. But as you can see, for all the countries here, we have taken Italy, Sweden, Turkey, and United Kingdom. Things are pretty flat, except for England, that sort of has this amazing world domination with all the colonies. And then once the industrial revolution get going for England in just before the 1800, and for the rest of the world just after the 1800, then things goes rapidly up. And you should see that on the y-axis we have the logarithm of the wealth. So it's not a linear axis, it's a logarithmic axis. So the distance between 1 and 10 is the same as from 10 to 100 and from 100 to 1,000. So for many years, many of us have been interested in the growth pattern in the industrial era, and I started doing some of that after my PhD, and I've done it along the way. We sort of went back to do that a few years ago, where we investigated 28 countries. And I don't want to go through too many details, but I just want to show you what such an analysis comes up with. If you look up in the upper right corner, I think I have my mouse here, we see the years out of the x-axis, and then we have subtracted a trend from the red dots are 30 Western European countries. We simply aggregated the wealth from 30 Western European countries, and we have normalized them to 1990 prices. And the blue dots, they are the same data from Denmark, and they are in 1929 prices, and then we have scaled them so they can be put on top of each other. So then we have subtracted a trend, and the trend turns out to be it's faster than exponential for pretty much all countries. It is an exponential with a second order polynomial in time, so the exponential to some constant times t squared, where t squared or where t is the time. And I could go on at length with all the differences between these countries. There are some very interesting differences, but I just want to say one thing, because else we get stuck in this here, that there seems to be, I mean, it's clear that there is much more power in the movements that have a long wavelength. That means that if you look at the data, it doesn't matter which ones, whether it's red or the blue ones, they're pretty nicely on top of each other. Then you see there are some small fluctuations that go up and down, but then we have some big sort of wave-like motions. And And this is something we find we have not found a country where this is not true. So what we can, so in sort of in technical terms, if there's anybody out there who's interested in time series analysis or in signal analysis, it means that the economy actually works as a low pass filter. And if you look at the lower left corner, we have then made a simple mathematical model that can generate such a pattern here. And then we have made simulations with a variety of different parameters. And then we have assumed that this type of dynamics will continue in the future. And you will see, I think there's about 500 simulation, Monte Carlo simulations we've made. And what we see is if we assume everything else continues as it does, then we'll see that this dramatic drop in growth that we've seen from the middle of the 1970s till today will continue until about 2030, and then we'll start, or in the late 20s, and then we'll start with a new upswing, and then we'll have a new peak, which will be, it turns out to be between 50 and 70 years that this wavelength is. Whether this is true or not, of course, we don't know, but this is just a possibility given, we're just looking at what are the data telling us. So I thought that we could not go any further back because, you know, I'm not a historian and certainly not an economist either. We're working with economists, but then we said, well, let's just try to see what happens if we make the same kind of analysis if we go back to about 1,000 years. So what we've done here, it turns out we don't have good enough data if we go back 1,000 years. We have, most people have started to, or they've sort of pushed their data back to about 1270 or the middle of the 1200. And here we have England, France, and Sweden on the left-hand side. Again, time on the x-axis, and we have the logarithm of the wealth on the y-axis. And once we allow this time series to go back beyond the Industrial Revolution, then not only can we not find an exponential that will fit this, that's simply not possible. We have to assume that there is a so-called hyperbolic growth. And hyperbolic growth is growth that, and you all know that exponential growth is very fast. Hyperbolic growth is dramatically much more faster because it actually has a finite time singularity. That means that the wealth should go to infinity in finite time. And I'll get back to what that means. This is, of course, not possible. But that is, if you want to have a simple model to actually fit these data. We're not thinking about how the real world works. We're just looking at it as data scientists. If you look at the right-hand side, there are we have the power spectra, and what you can see, for those of you who haven't seen a power spectrum before, on the right-hand side, or sorry, on the x-axis, it shows that sort of that tells you on the further you go out on the x-axis means that you have a shorter and shorter wavelength. I mean that you will have your oscillations will be shorter and shorter, and the further you go to the right, the longer they'll be. And if we look at if you look at the slopes of these things, we've also looked at the autocorrelation function. Then it seems like we can interpret these as these countries, our countries have, the wealth in our countries have a memory between 50 and 70 years. And again, this holds true for the countries we're able to find our data for. So what does all this mean? Well, to have a hyperbolic growth means that we have infinite wealth in finite time. So that means that at some point in the not too distant future, we should be infinitely wealthy, which is of course nonsense. We know that that's not possible. But what it means is that for those of you who are interested in the equation, this means that wealth, we have to assume that wealth generate wealth. And if you look at the equation, the differential equation, that's what is indicated with beta times WT. But then in addition, there is also, for this to work out, we have to assume that wealth not only generates wealth, and that gives exponential growth, but wealth also generates new ways of interacting, new ways to collaborate. And if we do that, that means that we'll have a second order term, and that's what generates this singularity. And if you look at, and I mean, obviously, if you look at what does that mean in practice, it means that, you know, once we started to, once we had the written word, that was a major breakthrough. Once Gutenberg invented the printing press, that was a major advancement. There's been a bunch of innovations in terms of how on how we organize our society. We think about, normally when you think about the Industrial Revolution, we think about, this was about conveyor belts and factories. Yeah, it was also that, but it was certainly also a different kind of governance. This is a time where we have to change away from the king that was close to God, to have a different representation. So these changes that we're talking about here, they're both of a technology nature, but also of a social structure nature. Those of you who are interested in reading the paper, we can see that below the equation I have, we actually said, okay, how robust are these estimations? And if we delete the late data, we actually, if we take data, if we include data up to the 1900, we'll still be able to predict the singularity. And if we delete the early data, as long as we take data up to about the year 1600, maybe even 1700, we're still able to predict about the same time for the singularity, and then it disappears. So it seems to be a fairly robust feature. Okay, so I mean, just to repeat here, I'll go to the next slide here. It means that wealth generates wealth, which traditional economic theory also says, but wealth also enables new forms for communication and collaboration to develop, and that means that they're both new physical and social technologies. And when we say that we have a singularity, then I think that I interpret that as being an indication that how we measure wealth is becoming obsolete. It has started to not make much sense, and I think most of us have had that feeling for a long time. Many people have come out and said that in many ways, although it's very difficult to come up with a concrete different way. I mean, today wealth is measured as the sum of the value of all the services and products that are exchanged on the market. But how could we redefine wealth if this one doesn't work anymore? And I would propose that you consult, for instance, Beinhofer, an economist from Oxford. He's certainly come up with the best solutions that I've heard. And he says, look, we need to dig a little bit further down than just looking at the value of the market. We have to look at what is the economy about. The economy is about how we solve human problems. I mean, if I make something or do something for you, then you are willing to give me something in return if it helps you in one way or the other. So Beinhofer proposes that we should define wealth as access to human solutions. And how is that going to be calculated? People smarter than me, they are trying to work this out, but certainly this is already being calculated when we calculate the when we calculate the rate of inflation and whatnot, and that's being used to determine how much in salary or how little we can take for products, etc. So this is actually something that one could imagine one could sort of say further develop. Another thing that, in my opinion, is really clear from these studies is that human collaboration is more fundamental to wealth development than competition. And that's kind of interesting because the sort of the day-to-day narrative is that we generate wealth by having companies to compete, the competition of ideas and whatnot. And this is certainly true, that it's important that we all the time find out better ways to do things, but all of that is happening on top of a tight network or web of collaboration. And so, and actually this is something, if you are familiar with dynamical systems, then you also know that if you have competing self-reproducing entities, then if they just grow exponentially, then the one with the highest fitness will win. But if you then allow two of the lousy competitors to actually collaborate with each other, so that so that company one helps company two, then you give it a little time, then both of them will wipe all the other ones out. Another thing that also is clear when we look at these historical data is that it's not only the physical technologies that has made a big difference. Democracy has had a huge impact in how more people have been able to do more things, both for themselves but also for everybody else. So that means that our social technologies are just as important as our physical technologies. And I'm saying that because certainly in this forum here, and also the European Commission and most funding agencies, they always want us to invent some new thingwit or device that can help us. Whereas what is just as important is how we actually implement this, how our social connections are, or how our business model is for this new technology. So that leads me to another part that I think is very important, and that's this sense that our physical technologies, which can be a hammer and a nail, it's a mobile phone app, it's all these AI, it's Internet of Things, it is whatever, all these physical technologies, they're having a mismatch with our social technologies. And our social technologies, the governance, our national laws, our international laws, our trade laws, it's how the market is organized, the firms, and yada yada yada. It's religion, morals, and all this important stuff that make up our social fabric, and is also important in defining what it means to be human. So what I would like to communicate here is that we have to pay just as much attention to be innovative with the social technologies as we are with the physical technologies. And actually, I think that a whole bunch, or a lot of the anxiety and problems we are experiencing in our world, both in terms of sort of in the private, in our own experiences, but also at societal and economic and global level, is because there is a mismatch between these new technologies and how to deal with them, how to put them into a good social embedding. So let me give you, again, these are these examples I came back with before. I think that this, to a great extent, has to do with, I mean, the reason why we are having problems, why these are problems, is because we haven't figured out how to, so to say, adjust these things with each other. So I'll just give you three concrete examples to indicate what I mean. I'll start with a so-called physical technology. Matteo Monti, was a student of mine a few years back. He's now in Switzerland doing his PhD, and he came up with a concept that I think would be very useful for us to take. We can say, how can we take the cloud home, the data cloud? This is a bio-inspired information architecture for private, secure, and democratic cloud data storage based on distributed small network computers. So imagine you have a Raspberry Pi, another small computer, and you have a flash drive. You can get that for about 100 euros. And then you network these small devices in a community with, we've figured out that should be about, let's just say 30, 35 individuals or household or businesses. So instead of having cloud stored data in a data center, we can have our data stored in our local internet. These small devices, they will be on all the time. You can put it up next to your Wi-Fi, and because all our data is encrypted and it is spread out on all these devices with redundancy, the chances of failure can be made much smaller than it is with the big data centers. Let's just see here. If you look at the figure to the left, we calculated based on our simulations, and also we actually did uploading and downloading with a local area network. So if you look at the village side, that means how many computers are networked together in a instead of having a centralized cloud. So the expected lifetime is on the y-axis, and you can see that with having a village up in about 50, you have lifetimes that are comparable to the age of the Earth. So you can make these things very reliable. And also, if you look at the download time, the more they're in the village, the faster it is, and the redundancy is given by these H factors here. So we have faster recovery than centralized data storage, and since these small machines, when a Raspberry Pi is going full power, which it'll only do every once in a while, it uses 3 watts. So it's much more. It has much less environmental impact than large centralized cloud data storage. And on top of this, we would be able to define cryptocurrency, and you could make distributed state administration and whatnot. But anyways, and by making this open source, this could be something that everybody could have. It would be free if we use a Wikipedia business model. And I should notice that the IT infrastructure has passed the impact of the global air traffic already back in 2013, and it's one of the fastest growing CO2 emitters we have. So here's a physical technology that we could implement that could eliminate the problems with, or many of the problems, not all of them, but many of the problems associated with loss of freedom, because we have loss because we are being profiled, and since it requires a new technology, it also requires that people agree to do it. So it's also, we have to organize in these villages. So it's both social and physical technologies. Something that I've tried to promote locally in here, I've been part of the government's what's it called, expert group on data ethics here a couple of years ago, and they weren't very interested in these things. But I think this is probably one of the most important problems, namely to ensure that we gain democratic governance of the internet of almost everything. Because today we see that pretty much all our critical infrastructures, they converge via the internet. It is our communication, it's our entertainment, our data storage, our financial interactions. It is a lot of our manufacturing with and coordination of what's it called, supply chains. It is transportation. Certainly, all the mass transit is, a lot of it is completely automated. And as we get more and more self-driving cars, that becomes true too. Our energy net is the same too. Our healthcare, certainly in Denmark, everything is digitalized. And when I order DNA sequences and other things, I simply send them off. They are being synthesized someplace else, and I get them in with the mail. And cyberspace has become an integral part of our environment. And this is something that has not sort of registered in most governments or in most states. We still have these separate departments that take care of all these different things, but we need to think in new categories because the cyberspace is becoming just as important as physical space, or I shouldn't say physical because it is physical, but geographic space. And I think from a law for legislation perspective, we should probably lean up against the laws we have for the commons. We have laws for clean air, we have laws for clean water, we have laws for how we can use the national forest, how we can use our beaches and whatnot. I think that that's a kind of what's it called, legislation that we could lean up against, so that we could ensure that these critical infrastructures become part of the commons with what they really are, like our. We can then have many private actors to go in and manage them as they do. Some of them well, and some of them not so well. I mean, for instance, the streets, most roads are publicly owned, but the energy grid is yeah, it's usually a public-private partnership. But anyways, so that's another area where the physical technologies are simply changing the game in such a dramatic way that we need to introduce new social technologies. Another thing I would like to mention here before we stop is something I haven't heard much of, but I think that it is very important that we think about CO2, because I mean, our environmental changes are really dramatic. We have a huge impact on the ecology on the planet. So some years ago, I've worked closely with a region in southern Denmark. It's called Sønderborg, and there's a non-profit organization called Project Zero. And this region decided to become carbon neutral in 2030, and that was a long time before it was fashion. It was in the what's it called, in the late zeros. And we started out looking at how we could have more energy efficiency, how we could reduce, how we could introduce CO2 reducing technologies, how could we set up industry and agriculture in such a way that the waste from one could be the input for the other, and so forth. And very important. Oh, I can see number 3. I was a little too fast here. How do we measure CO2? And one of the things that, yeah, let me get back to that. How do we actually measure the CO2 impact? There is stakeholder engagement, and then there is narratives and public relations. So let me just say a few words about how should we measure CO2. And it turns out that even today, Denmark is not looking at the actual demand that we have on the world and what kind of CO2 it generates. It looks at the footprint. It looks at the production generated CO2. How much does our activities that are located within the geographic limits of Denmark, how much CO2 does that generate? But that's kind of a crazy measure, because what really matters is how much do we import versus how much do we export. So it's import minus export. That is what really matters. And by doing it in the production way, then if we can if we send as much as the production to China that's really messing up the environment, then our CO2 accounting looks really good. And guess what? That's what we've done for many years, not only Denmark, but many countries. We've become cleaner and cleaner because we've sent all the bad stuff to other countries. No, we really need to focus on CO2, measure CO2 as a consumption generated CO2 emission. So, because if I buy a car that's made in Germany, it's true, it doesn't produce any CO2 here, but at least not the production of it, but it does in Germany. So that's an important thing. So how do we measure things? So it's not just the technology itself, it is really the also how we go about doing it. And what turns out to be the most important part of this equation is stakeholder engagement. In the beginning, management in Sønderborg, they went full throttle into all these different technologies, and they realized that very little happened until this change into getting people on board. Actually, stakeholder engagement. I guess this is what Carmen is trying to do here with these seminars, and that turned out to be by far the most important one. And I could whenever I came there, then when I jumped off, either there was a small plane or I went with a train, and I drove in taxi. In the first couple of years, nobody had heard about Project Zero, but the last years I worked there, everybody knew about Project Zero, and they were very proud of it. Then I want to say there are these spider diagrams at the bottom. I just want to say a few words about them. These are, I don't want to go into the details, but these are different ways where you can measure or rank how well a region is doing. And we have looked at Sønderborg, Copenhagen, and Odense. And the larger the area you have, the better your region is doing. So the smaller the region is, the worse it's off. And I'm sure that many of you have heard about Copenhagen as being the green capital. And it's also true, it is greener than some capitals around the world. But when you compare it, for instance, with Odense, and Odense doesn't have a very large PR, public relation budget, then Odense is significantly greener than Copenhagen. And why is Odense significantly greener? Well, because Odense has a bunch of the is exporting a whole bunch of the energy that it's producing, whereas Copenhagen is importing a lot of the energy that it is using. So it depends on how you measure these things. Anyways, yeah. So just to sum up, I didn't want to use examples that we've talked about a lot, but if you think about Google is a fantastic company. It has made amazing search algorithms that most of us are using, but they have a rotten or data ethical business model. Because the way they make money is by taking our private data. You could just as well use the same beautiful technology by having a subscription to the search engine, or as DuckDuckGo is doing, where they say, okay, they will hit you with some advertising as you use it, but they don't share your, or they don't keep your data, so they don't make profiling of you. And I could mention many others. I think you already know this community is very well aware of it, but I just wanted to mention other technologies and other areas which in the same way are characterized by the co-evolution and a play between the social technologies and the physical technologies. So I think I'm done here. How do I?
Hi, Steen.
Okay.
This is amazing. Okay. You're great. So I'm taking over. So as I'm always the first, I have many questions from the public. This was an amazing presentation. I will now switch over the screen so it looks like I have it again. to me. So I start, I would say basically, as we are here the AI for You Cafe, we of course want to know, you think that AI can be presently also very influential in fighting, yeah, the virus, COVID-19, as well as prevent poverty and so on. I make a little bit advertisement for our June 23rd event, so the participants have to be a little patient. Do you also are involved in fighting COVID-19?
Yeah. Yes. I work with the Danish what's it called, Center for Disease Control, and one of the hospitals to try. And now my wife is working for the Spanish government with the implementation of these new what's it called, disease tracing apps, or contagious tracing apps. And under certain, well, anyways, that's a long, we'll talk about that another day. Yeah.
Talk about, I just warn you, everybody in the audience, now I'm coming to the questions of the audience. We're having on June 23rd a special cafe session about this theme, and it's very actual, so I'm looking forward. Now comes the question from the audience, much more interesting. Raya Shatila from Beck. How reliable is the historical data on wealth? And how can it be compared across different countries that didn't exist in their today's form?
Yeah, well, the further back you go, obviously, the more uncertainty there is. And this is a huge debate, as far as I understand, with the historians and the historical economists. And I don't want to take that discussion. We're just using these data. We're saying, okay, if this is true, if these data are indeed indications for our wealth, what do they tell us? But clearly, such data has to be taken with a big grain of salt, and so does the results. So this doesn't mean that that what we found is true. It's just that given these data, that's what the analysis provides. Okay. And then, of course, we've done some interpretation. You could maybe interpret some of the things in a different way, but I don't think we've skewed things that much in that way. Hope not.
Thank you. So many questions are waiting. Maya Skriang. We are all across Europe here. Do you see AI as part of social structure, and in what way?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, AI is that's certainly. I thought we've had many presentations here where there is AI where we talk about an application and a particular implementation, but this is in a setting. I mean, I just think about search algorithms. I already mentioned that, where depending on what kind of a business model you're using, if you want to make money from what you're doing, and we have to make money in one way and the other, then you both have a physical technology, which is the algorithms, and you have a social technology, or you have a social structure which defines how this technology is implemented and how it's used. And I think it's really important that we think about both aspects. We can't just think about the technology. That's, I guess, one of the main, or that is maybe the main thing I want to convey with this presentation here.
Thank you. I think this also covers Alessandro Safiato. Great talk. You talk about technology in general. How do AI technology in particular change the picture? I think this was the question also covered. So Alessandro, good that you're here. Ode Schönken. Government will be responsible for how the infrastructure is governed. What do you think of the law passed in France 2 weeks ago called Avia law, which says that platforms will be responsible of the content published by their users and can be sued and have to pay fines if bad content is being published? This law basically transfers the responsibility of the state to the platforms. That's his question.
I think that I mean, how to do this is it's easy to say that in principle we have to that these has to be part of the commons. How exactly this exactly should be implemented, it really depends on the details. But I do think that, I mean, one way of giving more responsibility to the companies which has been, to say the least, irresponsible and unethical, the big platforms, in my opinion, to give them more responsibility, I think is a step in the right direction. But I do think that we have to go a major step further and say that since this communication, this way of communicating in the, I think about search algorithms, they show how the world is. Depending on how Google decides to define your search compared to mine, that means that we'll see different parts of the world. This cannot be given to a private company, in my opinion. In my opinion, that's something that should be under what's it called, under democratic governance. And I think that we have to, and what does that mean? It means that we have to have open source in terms of how these things work. It doesn't necessarily need that to be such that everybody can have access to this, but government bodies can go in and check these things. And the reason why I'm saying that all critical infrastructure shouldn't be open source in the traditional sense is that if we, for instance, have the metro system in Paris being open source, I could imagine that a number of young hacker boys, they would think it'll be real fun to stop the trains somewhere. So we shouldn't just have this open and available, but we should have it behind a firewall where independent people with insight, with competence in this area could check and double check that these algorithms, they were working in an appropriate way. I find it crazy that this conversation has not really started yet.
Yes, it's amazing. So, yeah. So I'm rushing you through. Natalie St. Pierre from Canada. Yeah, hey, Canada. Have you considered the UN Agenda 2030, the SDG, Sustainable Development Goals, as an interpretant framework of collaboration for new societal solutions? As an
yeah, I think that these UN world goals, they're good. Of course, we know that they are the ones that the countries could agree on. So there are many very important things that are not included, that should have been included. But yes, these are all good things. So I think that should be part of the framework. It's not enough, but it should be part of the framework. I mean, I don't think that it's difficult to see how you can, for instance, deal with the platform monopolies in this network. In this framework from the United Nations.
Okay. So now it comes slowly the last question. Sorry, there are more questions. Do you hear me? Thank you for a great talk. Thank you. This is Zahor ul Islam. Thank you for a great talk. Should we focus more on short-term solutions or look for the long-run plans? The reason I'm asking is any possibility solution which will slow down the innovation implementation process by different means.
Yeah, I'm certainly a firm believer in private initiative and you know, the free spirit. So in that way, I'm very liberal, but I don't believe in this in a so to say, in a senseless way, and I think we've sort of lost our senses in the last generation. How should we do it? I don't think the reason why it's so difficult is because there are no silver bullet. There isn't just one thing we should do. I think that we should, if we can do something incrementally better, we should do it. But we should also have a conversation about the big issues. I know how difficult it is because the government is really scared about thinking about visionary things. And I grew up, I was too young to be part of 68, but I did experience, I could sort of feel the waves. I was surfing a little bit on the waves from 68. And back then, people, they were crazy in the sense that they were really talking about new ideas in a without being shy. They had visions for how society should be better, and I think after, and of course many of these things, they were really crazy and completely unrealistic. But I think we need some of that back, or we need to allow or shift our focus to, instead of only focusing on the very short term, also allowing large ideas, and in particular visions for a better place to come. And this is also a recommendation for the artists, because it's often the authors and the filmmakers, etc., that actually make these these utopias. I think that you guys have been a little bit too good to talk about how terrible technology can be in terms of. So you are very good at, not only you, but I mean, in particular, what's it called? Hollywood is very good at making utopias. But we really need to see how all these new technologies can play together in a way so we get a beautiful and sustainable future. And there's no doubt that we can do it, but that there are very few stories out there, very few narratives out there that talks about that. I'm sorry, I started one place and ended another, but
I want to end this today. This is a great session, and as I say, I invite you soon for the next session. But I want to end it with Harari. I like what he said. You have to be great storytellers, and we all. And the most important is how we connect. I really got the essence out of this whole talk, was like our collaboration, that we are capable to collaborate with strangers on mass level. That we are the only species who can collaborate worldwide with strangers on a goal, and tell stories. And here, of course, the storytelling is to all of us, not only for the artists. It's really, I think, for all the creative people out there. It's everywhere in us. And I also make you aware, visions are needed. So,
yeah.
And also John Lennon, imagine. So that's my little talk for today. And I hope I invite you all back to this very multi-presenter, you see the slide on the screen, multi-presenter panel, which I would love that the CAVI would slowly but surely go into, that more people talk. We are a little bit too one-to-one. And one to face-to-face. I think more people should be in discussions. The next special multi-presenter cafe will be on June 23rd. We have 9 speakers on the panel, and we hope to make somehow all the participants involved in surveys and in questions. So welcome to change the cafe, bring in ideas, but especially join and and say what's up in your mind, because I cannot read all your questions. You have so many questions, and I will send them to you. I will send them, Steen. You may answer them if you like. You may share the presentation. Yeah?
I'll try.
Yeah, if you like, you share the presentation. If you like, you can send it to me if you like. I will send you the recording, and if Steen allows, you can find the recording online on YouTube and go to stage. But it's all up to Steen. That's our cafe session, and I hope to see you next week again. And thank you for joining. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you for listening. Bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. See you.
How do I get out here?